Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third in a three-part series on reforms to the AIFMD and UCITS frameworks, which have recently been signed into law and which will apply to Irish management companies or ManCos from quarter through 2026. My name is Etain de Valera, and I am a partner and the head of the Dillon Eustace Asset Management and Investment Funds team. I am joined today by my colleague Shane Coveney, who is also a partner in that team. Today, our focus is on the new rules relating to liquidity management tools, or LMTs, which are being introduced under revisions made to both the UCITS and AIFMD frameworks. So, Shane, liquidity remains a key issue for regulators in addressing macroprudential risks. What are the key changes that have been agreed at European level?
Thanks, Etain, and hello, everyone. The proposed changes include, for the first time, a regime for liquidity management tools by the ManCos. Essentially, all EU open-ended funds must have the power under their documentation to use two liquidity management tools, which must be drawn from a specific list set down in the new rules. EU money market funds will only be required to select one tool from that list in recognition of the liquid nature of the portfolios. In addition, management companies must have the ability to suspend subscriptions and redemptions or activate side pockets in certain circumstances.
And why the focus on liquidity management tools?
Well, the existing UCITS and AIFMD regimes already impose liquidity risk management requirements on ManCos, such as liquidity risk monitoring, liquidity stress testing, etc. And while the European Commission acknowledges that investment funds weathered the COVID-19 storm quite well, it has highlighted the liquidity constraints experienced during 2020 and has identified the need to ensure a more efficient response by management companies and, where relevant, competent authorities in market stress situations. Liquidity management tools are viewed as the effective means to allow ManCos to reduce liquidity pressure on funds and mitigate against investor losses in such stressed market conditions.
So, what are the liquidity management tools that management companies will be required to select?
ManCos will have the power to temporarily suspend subscriptions and redemptions in their fund documentation. They will also be required to provide for the ability to use at least two appropriate LMTs in their fund documentation from the following list: swing pricing, redemption gates, anti-dilution levies, redemption in kind, notice periods, redemption fees, and dual pricing. In selecting those tools, they will be required to assess their suitability for the relevant fund, taking factors such as liquidity profile and investment strategy into account, and then ensuring that at least two of those tools are provided for in the documentation. ManCos will be required to implement detailed policies and procedures for the activation and deactivation of selected liquidity management tools and the operational and administrative arrangements for those use of such tools. Under the new regime, information on the specific liquidity management tools selected and a copy of the policies and procedures for their activation and deactivation must also be filed with the relevant competent authority.
The requirement to provide for liquidity management tools and fund documentation doesn't sound like much of a game changer for management companies with open-ended Irish funds, is it?
Yes, you're right. In the current market practice for open-ended funds in Ireland is to have the ability under their documentation to use at least one liquidity management tool. However, there will now be an obligation to have the ability to use at least two of those management tools under the fund's rules, in addition to the ability to suspend dealing and/or invoke side pockets. There will also be restrictions on the use of certain of those tools.
That is interesting. Any in particular that jump out at you?
For example, under current Irish rules, in theory at least, in-kind redemptions may be made to investors without their consent, where the redemption request amounts to more than 5% of the value of the UCITS. However, under the new UCITS and AIFMD rules, in-kind redemptions can only be made to professional investors.
Thanks, Shane. Will mancos need to communicate with their investors when such tools are being used?
As you'd expect, a description of the possibility and conditions for using the liquidity management tools must be disclosed to investors pre-investment in the fund's prospectus. However, the home regulator must be notified without delay where a manco activates or deactivates the suspension of redemptions and subscriptions. This would be in line with existing Central Bank of Ireland requirements. The home regulator must also be prior notified of any activation or deactivation of side pockets. It must also be notified where other liquidity management tools are used other than in the ordinary course of business. Under the new regime, the competent authority must then notify ESMA and, where relevant, other EU regulators. In the case of UCITS, this notification obligation is triggered when any liquidity management tool is activated or deactivated. In the case of AIFs, the notification obligation is less onerous in that such notification to ESMA and other regulators is only triggered where suspension of dealing is activated or deactivated. Also, if there are potential risks to the financial system, the home regulator would also be obliged to notify the European Systemic Risk Board.
Clearly, the European institutions view harmonised liquidity management tool rules as an effective means to protect the value of investor money. Are there any additional changes to be aware of?
Yes, one in particular. The Commission is not just concerned with protecting investor money, but also has concerns of the broader systemic risk in situations of market-wide stress. As such, the regulators will have some expanded powers, but with some important limitations. Under the new rules and in line with existing Irish Central Bank rules, each competent authority will have the power to require a management company to activate or deactivate the suspension of redemption and subscriptions when this is in the interest of shareholders, in exceptional circumstances, and where there are investor protection or financial stability risks that, on a reasonable and balanced view, necessitate this requirement and after consulting with the management company.
You mentioned that national competent authorities will have the power to suspend dealings subject to certain requirements. Can they force management companies to activate, deactivate other liquidity management tools?
No, the choice of the remaining liquidity tools shall, for now at least, remain at the discretion of the management company, who are often not keen to activate these tools due to competitive or reputational reasons. Interestingly, ESMA, as part of developing guidelines to accompany the implementation of the new rules, must ensure that their guidelines recognise that the primary responsibility for liquidity risk management remains with the management company.
Finally, is there anything for management companies to do now?
Nothing for now. We're still 2 years away from the implementation of the changes. However, in due course, Irish management companies will need to review fund documentation to determine if, in fact, their provision for sufficient liquidity management tools and develop their policies and procedures to align with the new requirements. Where the constitutive document requires updating, shareholder approval may be required, depending on the legal structure of the relevant fund. I would also mention that in the course of 2024, ESMA will publish 2 separate consultation papers focusing on liquidity management tools, which should provide industry with some indication of the direction of travel on the detailed rules which will govern how such tools must be selected and operated.
Thanks, Shane, and thanks to everyone for joining us. We hope you found our conversation helpful, and please just visit our website to access the other 2 episodes in our series on reforms to the AIFMD and UCITS frameworks.